They call it the news. It's meant to inform you. But do you ever really feel informed? Here, we look for the signal in all that static. I'm Caesar, and welcome to Strange Frequency. And a good night. And let's get right into our opening segment, which is going to be a fun one. It was actually recommended by one of my very first subscribers. He reached out to me, and I thought it was worth a look. And the idea behind it is simple. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. We live in a world of screens, phones, cameras, social media. At first, it just changed how we communicate. In some ways, for the better, absolutely. Instantaneous communication. But over time, it started to change how people behave. And not in obvious ways, it was more subtle ways. So here's what we know. Recent writing based on the concept of screen people suggests we no longer just use screens. We behave as if we're constantly being watched through them. Not watched by one person, but potentially everybody. And because of that, people have adjusted. They rehearse more. They filter everything. They present themselves differently. Because at any moment, they could be recorded, they could be judged, or they could be shared. And that awareness doesn't just turn off. It stays with you in conversations, in your public life, in some ways, your everyday life, even when you're not out and about. And over time, this creates something. You stop just living and you start performing. So we go from living life to now we're performing life. Not always intentionally, but consistently. Everything else, and once the shift happens, and it's not everybody on your friends list, on your Facebook, on your Instagram, certainly not. But you know the ones when you see them. Especially if you know them personally and you know that the life that they're presenting is not at all what they're showing for, the thousands of their subscribers. And once the shift happens, everything else changes. You can see it in language now. You hear people referring to themselves as the main character, or they're having their villain arc. Oh God, we're going to get canceled. Which the canceling's been going on for quite a while, and that is a real phenomenon because we've gave it power, I guess. So people don't just experience life anymore. They narrate it, they frame it, they think about how it looks. And while it's happening, that changes behavior. Reactions become exaggerated. Moments become staged. And authenticity becomes something people try to perform. And when it happens, reality, we go back to reality, starts to feel different because you're no longer interacting with people just as they are. You're interacting with how they present themselves. And that presentation is curated. It's edited, adjusted for an invisible audience, and maybe that's part of the reason, while going off of our last episode, trust is down so much right now because people can sense it. They can feel it even if they can't explain it. That people just don't feel authentic. And when that feeling becomes common, you get, I guess, your regular folks that don't live that way, they begin to pull back a lot. They trust less. They question more. And it's one thing to question your government, your media, your institutions, but when you start questioning your buddy, your neighbor, that hits home, and it hits home a lot worse, I would say. Because authenticity starts to become harder to detect as a result of all this, and that's where things get more uncomfortable. This wasn't forced. No one made people do this. No one said, pick up your cell phone and record your every thought. No one said, hey, you've broke up with the same guy now, or you broke up with the fifth guy in 5 months and now you're recording it and you're blasting it out there on Instagram or TikTok. That's probably the most shocking stuff, is that stuff there, is where people vent about their lives to thousands of people. I guess they want the sympathy. Maybe it feels real when they're getting it from thousands of people. I don't know. I don't do that myself. I just try to bring you all a different perspective and some news occasionally. But being that people, weren't made to do this, they adapted. We adapted. We adjusted to the environment, and the environment rewarded it because of validation, because of engagement and attention, all tied to performance, which can all be tied back to some form of revenue. So naturally, when that validation kicked in, people started leaning into it. And now we have a world where people are always aware, always slightly performing, even when they don't even realize it. So a question is, when you talk to someone, are you actually talking to them, or the version of them that they've learned to present to the rest of us? And if that line is gone, how much of what you see is actually reality? And maybe the deeper question is this: if you remove the audience, will people still behave the same way? Or would everything change? Because if behavior depends on being seen, then what you're seeing isn't a person, it's a performance. And if that's true, then we're not just living in a world of screens anymore. We're living in a world that's shaped by them. Let's jump right into it, shall we? We call this when institutions start performing too. So let's take a step further with this one. In the last segment, we talked about how people have started performing their lives. But it's not just individuals anymore. Institutions are doing the same thing. And I would say they have always done the same thing. As someone who's paid attention to the media and our political bodies for a good chunk of his life. Congress is a full-time job, but they're not making laws 7 days a week. So a lot of what fills the time comes in form of committees. And those committees are supposed to serve a purpose, right? Oversight, accountability, fact-finding. They're supposed to operate in good faith for the American people. They're meant to bring clarity to complex issues. But more and more, that's not what people are seeing. Instead, what you often get is something else. It's one-sided attacks, one side deflects, no real answers, no real discussion. And when it's over, nothing is resolved. You're not watching a conversation, you're watching a performance. And what makes it worse than the social media or the individuals is that we pay for this. We pay for this, for these people to go in their committee rooms with their cameras and just yell at each other. And no, there's really no repercussion because not enough of us pay attention enough to vote these individual actors out. And a lot of times, most people wouldn't vote them out anyway because they're part of the same clique, I guess you'd say. So what happens when institutions stop explaining reality and they start performing it? The goal used to be understanding. At least that will be what I would think. Now it's about the moment. It's about the clip and the audience. The hearing isn't for answers anymore. It's for the people watching. Once the goal shifts, behavior shifts along with it. Things become predictable. Same talking points, same outrage, same responses. Different hearing, but overall the same script. And when people notice that, trust erodes. If nothing real is being said and nothing real is being solved, What exactly are people watching? What are we paying for here? This ties back to something deeper. It's not just individuals performing anymore, it's the entire system. The system is meant for performance. Circus and bread, remember? And when both people and institutions are performing, the line between what's real and what isn't starts to blur. So when people say nothing feels stable anymore, it's not just individuals, it's the systems meant to explain reality, performing it instead of revealing it. And once that happens, stability doesn't weaken, but it starts to disappear. Okay, guys, let's finish this out strong. Finish it out somewhere much, much older. And in this segment, we call it the Watchers, what they were and what they did. So, somewhere older, much, much older, before modern systems, modern politics, or modern institutions, there were stories about beings that watched humanity. According to the Book of Enoch, these beings were called the Watchers. They weren't human. They were described as angels, but not passive angels. They were aware, they were present, and always observing. And most importantly, they had a role. That role was simply this: watch humanity. Don't guide it, and don't interfere. The text describes them as descending from above, and when they did, they took form. They walked among people. And then something changed. They didn't stay observers, they began to interact. And once that happened, they crossed a line. Here's what the text says they did: they taught humanity knowledge it did not have: metalworking, weapon creation, knowledge of warfare. They taught astrology, the movement of stars. They introduced knowledge that allowed people to predict and to control. One figure, a famous one, Azazel, is said to have taught weapon making, while others taught knowledge tied to influence and hidden systems. These weren't small changes. They altered behavior, they accelerated development. And according to the text, it wasn't seen as progress, it was seen as corruption. They didn't just observe humanity anymore, they changed its direction. So here's what we know: across cultures, there are repeated stories of something watching humanity, and sometimes even stepping in, not guiding, but influencing. And when influence enters a system, you know the outcome is going to change. Stepping back a bit, we ask, what happens when an observer becomes a participant? The system shifts, because observation is neutral, but influence is anything but. And once something shapes outcomes, it alters reality itself. So the real question isn't just what the Watchers were, it's what happens when something meant to observe, of that magnitude, of that presence, decides to influence. Because if that line was crossed once, there's no reason to assume over time that it wasn't crossed again. And if something can observe without being seen and influence without being understood, the effects would still be there, even if the source isn't. And maybe that's why things feel slightly off. Not enough to prove, but enough to notice. And once you notice it, you don't really see things the same way. Just kind of something to think about. And if you like content from the Book of Enoch, which I find extremely fascinating myself, I like the debate about it. Let me know in the comments. I'll probably cover more topics, more characters, and more lore from that book. And that concludes tonight's broadcast. As always, links to the articles used will be in the description below, and if you have anything strange or unexplained, put it in the comments. Please like and subscribe and share this with your friends. Until next time, we'll keep listening for the signal.